The Buddha never gave anyone a checklist. But that is exactly how most people read his most famous teaching. 8 steps, follow in order, check them off. The Eightfold Path is not 8 steps you climb. It is 8 adjustments happening at the same time, and you are already doing all of them, most of them badly. The word English translates as right, right view, right speech, right action does not mean right. It means something closer to tuned. And once you hear that, this teaching stops being a religion and starts being a tool you can use before this video is over. There is a story in the Pali texts about a king named Pasenadi who ruled the kingdom of Kosala from the city of Savatthi. He was one of the most powerful men in ancient India. He had armies, palaces, cooks who spent their lives learning to prepare a single dish. And he had a problem he could not solve. He could not stop eating. The text says he ate a whole bucket of rice and curry, a donga, roughly the size of a grain vessel you would carry to market. Not a bowl, a bucket. And then, still full, still barely able to breathe, he walked across the city to see the Buddha. He arrived huffing and panting. He sat down, and the Buddha, Sate, who could have lectured him about discipline, who could have listed rules for proper eating, who could have given him a diet plan, did none of those things. He gave him one verse, one sentence. It said that when a person is always mindful and knows when enough food has been taken, their afflictions become slender and they age slowly. That is it. No commandment, no prohibition, no step 1, step 2, just notice. Notice when you have had enough. And then something remarkable happens in the text. Pasenadi turns to a young Brahmin student standing behind him, a boy named Sudasana, and says, "Memorize that verse. Recite it to me every time food is placed in front of me. I will pay you 100 coins a day." So the king does not change through willpower. He does not follow a rule. He builds a system, a daily reminder that adjusts how he pays attention at the exact moment it matters. And over weeks, the text says, he gradually reduces his eating. His body slims down. He strokes his own limbs with his hands, feeling the difference, and says aloud, "The Buddha showed me compassion in 2 ways, for this life and the next." That story is the Eightfold Path in miniature, not a rule imposed from outside, an adjustment made from within. And the adjustment was not about food. It was about attention. Now here is the thing that changes everything about how you read this teaching, the word that appears before every single factor of the path. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. That word, in Pali, is sama, and sama does not mean right. The Pali Text Society Dictionary, the most authoritative Pali English reference in existence, defines sama as properly, completely, in the right way, not morally correct, not opposite of wrong. The scholars who have spent their careers inside this language say the word connotes completion, thoroughness, harmony. It is closer to properly aligned than to morally right. Think of tuning a guitar. You do not tune a guitar by following a checklist. You tune it by listening. And when one string is out, the whole instrument sounds wrong. Even if the other 5 are perfect, that is what sama means. Not a judgment, a calibration. And it applies to all 8 factors at once. Bhikkhu Bodhi, an American-born Theravada monk, and one of the most respected Pali scholars alive, wrote the definitive English study of the Eightfold Path in 1984. He said the 8 factors are not steps to be followed in sequence, one after another. He compared them to the intertwining strands of a single cable. Each strand supports the others. Remove one and the cable weakens. The strength comes from all of them working together. The symbol of the teaching itself tells you this. The Dharma wheel, the Dhammacakka, has 8 spokes, not 8 rungs on a ladder. 8 spokes radiating from the same center. If you remove one spoke, the wheel does not roll. It collapses. And here is where modern science confirms something the Buddha intuited 2,500 years ago. Richard Davidson, a neuroscientist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, has spent decades studying the brains of experienced meditators. You cannot train one mental faculty in isolation. When you train attention, the prefrontal cortex changes, but so does the amygdala. Regulation shifts. Decision-making shifts. The brain does not have a mindfulness department and a separate intention department. It is one system. Train any part, and you are training all of it. The Buddha did not know the word prefrontal cortex, but he designed a practice that mirrors exactly how the mind is built. 8 adjustments, operating simultaneously, each one making the others possible. So if the path is not a checklist, if it is not 8 steps you complete one at a time, what does it actually look like in your life? Not in a monastery. Not in ancient India, in the conversation you will have this afternoon, in the decision you will make about your work tomorrow morning. If this is your first time here, this channel takes the oldest teachings in Buddhism and makes them usable. No jargon, no religion required. If that sounds like something you want more of, subscribe. It takes 1 second and it helps this channel exist. Now, we are about to walk through what happens when you take these 8 adjustments out of the monastery and into a Tuesday afternoon. And then we are going back 2,500 years to the very first time the Buddha ever taught this path, because the people he taught it to had a checklist. They had been following it for years, and he told them it was the problem. You said something yesterday that you did not need to say. You know which one it was? Maybe it was true, maybe it was even accurate. But it was not necessary, and something shifted in the room after you said it. A small tightening, a half-second of silence that was not there before. That is where the Eightfold Path lives. Temples. Not in a temple. In that half-second, the Buddha described samma vaka, what English calls right speech, not as a single rule, but as 5 simultaneous conditions. What you say must be true. It must be timely. It must be gentle. It must be beneficial. And it must be spoken with goodwill. Not one of those. All 5. At the same time. And this is why it is not a checklist. A checklist would say, do not lie. Done. Move on to the next step. But the Buddha's standard is far more demanding than that. You can speak the truth harshly. That is 1 string tuned and 4 out. You can say something beneficial at the wrong time. 2 strings tuned and 3 out. You can be gentle and kind while saying something that is not actually true. And that fails too. The calibration is happening in real time, in every sentence you speak, every text you send, every meeting you sit through. And no one does it perfectly. The point is not perfection. The point is that you are paying attention to the instrument. Most moral codes give you a line. Stay on this side, you are good. Cross it, you are bad. The Eightfold Path does not work that way. There is no line. There is a dial, and the dial is always moving. Samavata asks you to notice where the dial is right now. Not where it was yesterday. Not where you want it to be, but where it is in the sentence you are currently forming in your mouth. And you cannot do this with speech alone. This is the part the checklist reading completely misses. The Buddha did not separate these 8 factors because he thought they were independent. He separated them because he wanted you to see that they are not. Your speech comes from your intention. Your intention comes from your view, how you see the situation, what you believe about the person in front of you. Your view is shaped by your effort, what you pay attention to, and what you ignore. Your effort is sustained by your concentration, and your concentration is built through your livelihood and your actions. Because a person who spends 8 arms others cannot sit down in the evening and suddenly calms and suddenly become mindful. The residue follows you. Ananda, the Buddha's closest student, the man who walked beside him for 25 years and memorized more of his words than anyone alive, once said something to the Buddha that reveals exactly how this works. He said, "I think half of the holy life depends on good friendship, good companions, good associates." And the Buddha corrected him. He said, "Do not say that, Ananda. It is not half the holy life. It is the whole of the holy life." That means the path is not something you do alone inside your own head. The people around you, the environment you create, the work you choose, that is not separate from the practice. That is the practice. Sama ajiva, what English calls right livelihood, is not an abstract commandment to find meaningful work. The Buddha was specific. He named 5 trades to avoid: weapons, human beings, meat for slaughter, intoxicants, and poisons. Not a vague principle, a diagnostic. Are you making your living by selling things that hurt people? If yes, that is not a moral failing. It is a string out of tune, and it is pulling every other string out with it. The Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius, writing in Rome roughly 600 years after the Buddha, arrived at a similar insight. He wrote that virtue is not a list of achievements to collect, but a way of moving through each hour. He did not call it tuning, but he described the same thing, the constant, moment-by-moment work of aligning how you think, how you act, and how you speak. Not once, continuously. And this brings us back to where it all started, not to a philosophy, to a specific evening in a specific grove, with 5 specific men who were absolutely certain they already knew the answer. Before the Buddha was the Buddha, he was a man named Siddhartha Gautama, who had tried everything. He had lived in a palace with dancers and musicians and 3 separate residences, one for each season. He had left all of it. And then he had done what the most serious spiritual seekers of his era did. He had starved himself for 6 years. The texts say he ate 1 sesame seed a day, then 1 grain of rice. His ribs were visible, his spine pressed against the skin of his stomach. His eyes sank into his skull. He sat in the heat, he sat in the rain, he held his breath until his head screamed. He did everything on the list, and the list did not work. So he stopped. He ate a meal of rice milk offered by a woman named Sujata, and the 5 ascetics who had been practicing beside him, men who admired him precisely because he was willing to suffer more than they were, saw him eat and walked away in disgust. He had broken the checklist. He was finished, as far as they were concerned. Siddhartha sat beneath a fig tree and did not get up for 3 days. When he stood, he was not the same person. And the first thing he did, the very first thing, was walk over 100 miles to find those 5 men. They saw him coming. The Vinaya texts say they agreed among themselves. Here comes Gautama, the luxury seeker, the one who gave up. Do not greet him. Do not offer him a seat. Do not wash his feet. But as he got closer, something in the way he moved made it impossible for them to keep the agreement. One by one, they stood. One took his bowl. One prepared a seat. One brought water. And then he sat down and taught them the first teaching in the history of Buddhism. The Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the discourse that set the wheel turning. He did not start with a list. He started with a rejection. He said, there are 2 extremes that anyone who has gone forth should avoid. One is devotion to sensory pleasure, the life he had lived in the palace. The other is devotion to self-mortification, the life these 5 men were still living. The path that leads to understanding is neither. It is the middle. And then he named it. 8 factors. Not 8 steps. Not first do this, then do that. 8 simultaneous adjustments. View, intention, speech, action, livelihood, effort, mindfulness, concentration. All operating together, like the spokes of a wheel, he was setting in motion for the first time. Those 5 ascetics had spent years following the most extreme checklist in the ancient world. They had rules for how little to eat, how long to hold their breath, how much pain to endure without flinching. They had checked every box, and they were no closer to freedom than the day they started. The Buddha's first act as a teacher was to tell them that the checklist itself was the obstacle. Davidson's research at Wisconsin confirms why this works. The brain is not a collection of independent modules you can optimize one at a time. When experienced meditators train in compassion, the regions responsible for attention shift. When they train in concentration, emotional regulation improves. The prefrontal cortex does not operate in isolation from the amygdala. They are wired together. You cannot tune one without affecting all the others. 2,500 years before anyone mapped a neural pathway, the Buddha built a practice on exactly that principle. 8 adjustments. Not in sequence, not in isolation. All at once, like 8 strings on a single instrument. You do not finish tuning. You keep listening. You keep adjusting. That is the practice. That is the path. Not something you complete, something you do today, tomorrow, in the next sentence you speak, in the next decision you make about how you earn your living. In the next moment, you notice your mind drifting toward something it does not need. So here is what the Buddha actually taught and what the translation hides. First, the Eightfold Path is not 8 rules to follow in order. It is 8 adjustments operating at the same time, like the spokes of a wheel or the strands of a cable. Remove one and the whole thing weakens. The Pali word sama does not mean morally correct. It means complete, harmonious, properly aligned. The practice is not obedience, it is calibration. Second, you are already doing all 8 right now. You are already seeing, already intending, already speaking, already acting, already working, already trying, already noticing, already focusing. The question has never been whether you are doing them. The question is whether you are doing them well. The path does not ask you to start something new. It asks you to pay attention to what you are already doing and adjust. Third, you are not someone who has failed to follow the path. You are not behind. You have not missed the first step because you did not know there was a first step. There is no first step. You have been walking this path your entire life without knowing it. Every conversation, every decision, every morning, you chose how to spend your attention. The only question is whether you are tuned. A king who could not stop eating did not need a diet. He needed one verse, recited at the right moment, to change how he noticed what he was doing. That was the whole intervention. One adjustment, and it changed his body, his health, and, the text says, his future. Which of the 8 adjustments do you think you are most out of tune with right now? Not the one you are worst at. The one you are least aware of. The one running on autopilot while you focus on everything else. Tell me in the comments. If this changed how you see the teaching, subscribe. There is more where this came from. And none of it requires you to believe anything. Just to pay attention. The Buddha did not give the world a checklist. He gave it a tuning fork, and it has not stopped vibrating for 2,500 years.